If, like me, you're a fan of the Fallout series, you'll be aware of Vault Tec, won't you? Aye, of course you will. And you'll no doubt also be aware that they weren't exactly the most ethical company to have ever existed, and that's putting it bloody mildly. So in this video, we're taking a look at the 5 most disturbing experiments that Vault Tec carried out. So for our first entry on this list, we have Vault 95. Any of you that have played Fallout 4, you'll probably be aware of this one. From the outside looking in, this vault actually looks quite noble in its intentions. It was actually styled as a rehabilitation clinic. Only chem addicts would be allowed admittance to it. Now then, like every other vault, this one had an overseer, and it were her job to make sure that said chem addicts did indeed stick to the Vault Tec rehabilitation program. You know, daily group meetings and that kind of thing. Living amongst all the chem addicts was a Vault Tec agent. His job was to basically spy on the occupants and report his findings back to the overseer. However, this wasn't the only responsibility the Vault Tec agent had. 5 years after Vault was sealed, it was the agent's task to open up a secret stash of drugs while the rest of the residents were sleeping. As you can imagine, this caused absolute bloody pandemonium. While some of the Vault dwellers did indeed try to stick to the program, the vast majority of them gave in to their urges, which is understandable in this situation, innit? Now, we don't actually know what happened to the residents, as nothing set in concrete, but we can assume that violence broke out and the vast majority of them were indeed killed. To back this up, we do have a couple of terminal entries from one of the chem addicts called Jay Scott. He describes violence, shooting, you know, all that fun stuff. Couple that with the fact that the gunners inhabit the vault during the events of Fallout 4, we can pretty safely say that the residents are indeed dead. Or, you never know, some could have escaped into Wasteland. I think the saddest part about this whole vault story is the Vault Tec agent in charge of spying on the chem addicts said that the treatment were working, and while some of them were suffering from withdrawal symptoms, the vast majority of them had beat their addictions. Next on the list, we have Vault 106, and this one, again, is kind of drug related, but in a totally different way. Now, this is another in-game vault, and we can visit it in Fallout 3. So if you're feeling nostalgic, why not fire up your old PlayStation or Xbox and go and have a ganders. Right then, the experiment in this vault was really quite simple. Pump psychoactive drugs through the air filtration system and watch what happens. Nothing too fancy or elaborate, just a nice friendly bit of torture. Now, I would like to add, even though it doesn't make much of a difference, the chemicals weren't pumped through the vents until 10 days after the vault was sealed, which is simply lovely of Vault Tec, innit? Give the residents 10 days of feeling safe and secure before repeatedly bashing them over the head with the gaseous form of a club. Anyhow, moving on swiftly. The overseer knew exactly what were going on and was totally 100% bloody complicit. He actually instructed his security staff to outright lie to the vault dwellers, you know, if they smelt any strange odours or something along them lines. I think it goes without saying that this vault didn't have an happy ending. The vast majority of the people living there did indeed go crazy and proceeded to kill the Vault Tec security and presumably the overseer as well. However, there is a note we can find in the living quarters of Vault 106, and it's titled "To Anyone Who Gets This." There's not too much on it, but it does show that not every single vault resident was affected as badly as some of the others, if that makes any sense. Yeah, of course it does. By the time Fallout 3 comes around though, the only inhabitants of Vault 106 are insane survivors, so we can assume that the people less affected were all pretty much killed off. The next vault we're looking at is Vault 75, and again, this is an in-game location found in Fallout 4, and it's located under the Malden Middle School. This one's a pretty nasty one. It was aimed more at school children and the families. I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory considering the bloody thing were built under a school, but anyway. When the bombs eventually fell, the school children, along with their adults and the teachers, made their way into the vault. Absolutely no problems whatsoever. Until what was known as orientation occurred. The children were split up from the adults, and then the adults were systematically executed by Vault Tec security. Simply lovely. The children, who were now at the mercy of Vault Tec, were raised learning about the horrors of Up Top Land, or the Wasteland to me and you. There was also taught that by the time they reached graduation, they'd be fit and strong enough to venture out into the Wasteland and help all the poor and suffering people they came across. What actually happened at the age of 18, or graduation, was one of two things. If the student didn't meet the standards of Vault Tec, they'd be instantly executed and their bodies would be burnt in an incinerator. Now on to what you'd assume to be the bright side, you know, if the students did pass Vault Tec requirements, then said student would be harvested. Now, we don't know exactly what harvested means, but a lot of people seem to believe that it means the harvesting of their organs. Seriously, some of these backstories they wrote for the vaults are properly dark and properly interesting, to be honest with you. If only they spent this amount of time on Fallout 76. Anyway, back to the vault. Now, you may be asking yourself, what's the bloody point in all of this? Why kill the kids when they get to 18 or harvest them, whatever that means? Well, if you give me a minute, I'll bloody well tell you. The experiment was known as refinement of human genetics. I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory, isn't it? It was basically just trying to find a way to improve the human genome, you know, through genetic modification or selective breeding. All that scientific goodness. Now, with this vault, again, we don't know what happened to the residents. There's a couple of entries in terminals that suggest there was some form of rebellion, but the gunners, during the time of Fallout 4, inhabit the place, and there's not much more we know about it. But by the little bits we've gone over here, I think we can all agree that it was a pretty twisted experiment, even by, you know, Vault Tec standards. Right then, next up we have Vault 11, and if you've played Fallout New Vegas, this one's going to be pretty familiar to you. As with 99.9% of all the other vaults, this one also did have an experiment behind it. I mean, we wouldn't be covering it on this list if it didn't, but anyhow. This experiment is a little bit different than the others we've got on our list, though. It's more of a social experiment rather than an actual physical experiment. Does that make sense? I hope it bloody does. To put it as simply as I possibly can, every year the inhabitants of Vault 11 were told to choose one of the fellow vault dwellers and execute them, otherwise the computer, which ran the vault, would systematically kill them all. From information we can get from terminals scattered throughout the vault, the way this sacrifice worked was every year the inhabitants would choose somebody to get, well, sacrificed. That person would then, funnily enough, become the overseer. After the person's term was up as overseer, they would be told to enter an execution chamber and get, well, executed. There's no other way to say it, really, is there? This tradition and cycle went on for so long, voting blocks actually became a thing. I think there were 6 or 7 main ones. I'm not too sure on that, though. Think of these blocks as like political parties. Each one would nominate an overseer who'd be sympathetic to their goals and their desires. The sad thing about all this, all the sacrifices, all the voting and whatnot, it wasn't needed. All the residents needed to do was just refuse to sacrifice somebody. If they would have refused from day one, the computer would have congratulated them and actually opened the vault doors as a reward, so the inhabitants could leave and enter the vault at will. Eventually, the vault dwellers did just that. They refused to sacrifice anybody else. Unfortunately, by this time, there was only 5 of them remaining. By the time we visit the vault in New Vegas, it's been abandoned for decades, so we can safely assume that the vault dwellers have either left and are living in the wasteland, or they're dead. Now for our last one. It's absolutely bloody weird, I'm not going to lie to you, and it's not in any of the games, it's only mentioned. However, it was used to promote Fallout 3 in the form of a webcomic called One Man and a Crate of Puppets. Yep, we're talking about Vault 77. As the title suggests, Vault 77 was an experiment where one bloke was put in a vault with absolutely nobody else, other than a crate of puppets. The poor bloke obviously thought that this was some kind of mistake and he pleaded for the other people to be let in. Obviously his pleas went unheard, and he was alone for a very long time, which kind of messed around with his mental health a little bit. However, by the year 2079, the lone vault dweller found the crate of puppets. How fantastic is that? Now obviously, he started to play with the puppets. You know, it's what you do. You've got bugger all else to do in a vault on your own, haven't you? But after about a month, he started to believe that the puppets were talking to him, in particular the Vault Boy puppet. Now, as we said before, he's been on his own a long time, so his mental health isn't in top condition. So let's not judge him too harshly for what happened next. The vault dweller proceeded to rip apart his king puppet and then blamed the Vault Boy puppet of doing it. The puppet, however, informed the man that it was actually him who ripped apart the king, and they need to flee the vault because they're worried about what the dog puppet's gonna do. Yep, it's getting really confusing, I know. Following this, the puppet man, as he's now called, and his Vault Boy puppet fled Vault 77, leaving it abandoned. Now, we don't know what happened to Puppet Man and his little fellow travelling companion, but you can find a Vault 77 jumpsuit and a holotape in Paradise Falls. Anyway, that is it from me. I know this video's different than my usual stuff, but I hope you enjoyed it. It's nice to mix things up every now and again. As ever, I'd like to say a massive thank you to all my Patreons. The extra support is much appreciated. If that's something you'd be interested in, take a look at description and you'll see a link down there to it. And while you're down at description, why not take a look at Discord too? You can chat with other Fallout fans, promote your content, and even join the Sean Bean Appreciation Society. And of course, guys, if you did like the video, hit that like button, let me know I'm doing an half-decent job, and if you want to see more weekly Fallout content, consider hitting that subscribe button too. Anyhow, as we say it north, I love you and leave you, and I'll catch you next.